Hello, everyone. My name is Janine Donnelly. I'm the manager of webinars for IBM Systems Magazine. And on behalf of IBM Systems Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. Today's webinar, CICS and Db2 Performance Analytics based on SMF data, is sponsored by IntelliMagic. We're delighted to be presenting this webinar today. The response to it has been overwhelming. Today's webinar now holds the record for the highest number of registrations in our history of doing webinars. So thanks to all of you for your interest, and thanks to our partners at IntelliMagic for making it possible for us to bring it to you. I'd like to now introduce you to our first speaker for today, Brent Phillips, Managing Director of IntelliMagic in the Americas. Brent, you now have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Janine. It's fun to be part of this record-setting event at IBM Systems Magazine, so thank you, everyone, for joining today. You're the ones that made this possible. I think the attendance shows there's obviously a significant appetite for smarter ways to process, understand, and leverage the immense intrinsic value in the SMF data for CICS and Db2. It's just so hard to get your hands and head around it using the methods and products designed decades ago. So we're pleased to show you today a modernized approach to more easily tap into the value of this very important data with less time and money by using smarter algorithms to do the intelligent data preparation, correlation, interpretation to help the human analyst. So let me start by introducing the two people presenting with me today. First is Dr. Gilbert Houtekamer, who is Dutch and pronounces his first name Joubert, so don't be confused if you hear us calling him that. Besides being the CEO and co-founder of IntelliMagic, he's also been inducted into the Mainframe Hall of Fame. And last year, he also won the CMG Computer Measurement Group's prestigious A.A. Michelson Award for lifetime contribution to the performance and capacity profession. An interesting fact about him is that even though I've been working with mainframes for nearly 35 years, Joubert is still the only person I've ever met that earned his PhD in MVS I/O subsystems. So he's been working in depth on the mainframe platform for quite some time. But most importantly to us here at IntelliMagic and also to our customers, he's also the chief architect of our analytics solution for the z/OS environment, which is what you'll see in action today. Also presenting with us is Todd Haverkost, who's a senior z/OS performance and availability consultant on staff with IntelliMagic after spending many years in the mainframe performance and capacity discipline at a large financial services company. Todd's well known in the industry for groundbreaking and award-winning presentations at mainframe conferences in the area of z/OS infrastructure analysis and optimization. And we're very happy to have him on our staff, and so are our customers. I regularly get accolades from customers that have benefited from his valuable advice. So Todd will be leading the live demo section in today's webinar. So here's the agenda. First, I'll briefly cover 4 slides about the why and the how behind more intelligent analytics. And then, secondly, Joubert and Todd will cover a section on the analysis of the CICS data. And then they'll switch to the Db2 analysis topic. They'll spend about double the time on Db2 as they will on the CICS topic. Once we're done with that, we'll wrap up with a poll question and immediately share the results of that with everybody. Then describe an offer to see what we have shown you using your own data. And then finally have some time for questions and answers. So like Janine said, please post your questions in the box throughout the webinar. We're not going to have time to answer all of them, but we will get back to you if we don't answer your question during the webinar itself. So let's talk about z/OS infrastructure operation analytics. But first, I thought I'd give you just a little bit of background about IntelliMagic. I know we have a lot of customers on today, but also a lot of people that may not be familiar with IntelliMagic. So this will give you a feel for who we are and what motivates us. We are, by the way, a privately held company with no debt, no venture investment. We only grow when we keep our customers happy, and we've grown steadily over the years because of happy customers. So we're now about 70 people focused only on this area of developing and delivering more intelligent analytic solutions for your enterprise systems. So we're inspired by this quote from Arthur Clarke. It describes what's intended with the name IntelliMagic, providing an experience through advanced technology that often wasn't even thought possible before seeing it. You'll see this antiquated lighthouse in various places. It's something of an icon for us. The heyday and demise of the lighthouse is a metaphor for what we're doing on the digital infrastructures today. Because if you think about it, there's three distinct eras for safely navigating the seas to conduct trade and commerce. The first era was prior to lighthouses, and this time during the cloudy or foggy nights, a ship did indeed often lose track of where they were and sometimes ran aground on the rocks hidden under the surface of the water, losing lives and cargo. But the advent of lighthouses, the second era, must have felt like magic to the captains that could then better tell where they were and navigate safely around those hazards. The third area, of course, was the demise of the lighthouse, which was brought about by GPS technology. So that uses precise location data correlated with digitized expert knowledge about the physical terrain to provide a far superior experience. So superior that today every commercial ship, of course, navigates by GPS, not with lighthouses. So today, where commerce happens is on the digital computing infrastructure, and that can also be viewed as three eras. The first era for the mainframe was back in the 60s when there was really very little instrumentation available. If you had a problem, you had to call in the vendor and use probes and the like. So the lighthouse era for digital platforms started about 40 years ago when the platform became more instrumented and static reports could be generated from the data. Analysts could then create reports and use their own hard-earned expert knowledge to determine if what they were looking at was good or bad. Today, though, the third era is already here, and it's outdated the process of eyeballing hundreds of separate static reports to try to determine what they mean in the context of the infrastructure. The computer today, using smarter algorithms, can provide precise location awareness of where the workloads are in relation to the infrastructure capabilities. That's done by using digitized expert knowledge about the physical reality of the infrastructure running the workloads. So that's akin to the evolution from lighthouses to GPS. It produces a far superior result for the objective of efficiently maintaining the infrastructure availability for your business applications. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a couple of key observations I want to cover about the ZOS operations analytics topic. Most of you are probably familiar with this adage. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. It was developed decades ago and is widely quoted. Today, out of all the enterprise platforms, ZOS is the most instrumented there. There's a rich, robust set of metrics available in the form of RMAP and SMF. And that's good because the richer the data source, the smarter the analytics can be if you mine the data intelligently, which is really the problem most sites still have with the data due to antiquated reporting processes and products. So I'd like to propose a new version of the statement, which is if you can't interpret it, you can't manage it. So that's really what it's about. What does the data mean for your workloads on your specific infrastructure? The problem, of course, is just there's so much data. The volume and complexity of the data per head has increased significantly in recent decades. There's more metrics, there's more infrastructure size, so it's just too much to handle. We need the computer to come in and provide some help in the form of smarter algorithms that assess what the data means and what's important and showing that to the human analyst. So it's really becomes human plus machine versus problem, not a human versus machine. We need the machine to do more work on behalf of the analyst team. So that's where we talk about artificial intelligence. Here's a simple definition that's very practical. It's just making the machine do things that would require intelligence if done by men back in 1968. So these are the kind of things like building spreadsheets manually or coding a new static report every time you need a new kind of view. If you're involved in doing that kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that should be automated, which is really good for your career anyway. The more you can spend your time on analysis and remediation, the more value you are offering to your company. So we've talked about inviting AI to the team. It really is a powerful force multiplier, both for the expert analysts as well as the new people coming up to speed. So how does our solution, which is called IntelliMagic Vision, how does that augment the human analysis? It starts with how the data is processed down in the dark blue middle circle there, validating the data, normalizing it, correlating different record types with each other for seamless navigation, assessing and rating the most important metrics to know what's good or bad in the context of the infrastructure. So that's what intelligent analysis mentioned on the lower right is about, using that digitized expert knowledge about ZOS so the algorithms can assess and rate the metrics in the context. as well as statistical analysis to recognize significant workload changes, even if you do have enough infrastructure capacity to handle that workload without performance issues. So that intelligent analysis enables you to be predictive, really for the first time, seeing many types of issues developing before they reach the critical production status, and also prescriptive, meaning there's reasons and recommendations built in, which helps both experts as well as new staff coming up to speed. So you'll see in the live demo the ability to interact and navigate through the data, which is a far different experience than eyeballing hundreds of static reports that aren't rated and where you can't drill down and look at it from a variety of different dimensions with just a few clicks. Also, this modernized way of handling the data makes it easy to get the derived intelligence into something like Splunk, for example, which is far more efficient and useful than simply dumping all the raw data into a platform like that, which is very expensive. And the platform doesn't understand the ZOS metrics or infrastructure capabilities and can't deliver out of the box in meaningful reports without a lot of customization. So finally, before turning it over, just for current customers, I mean, they're familiar with IntelliMagic Vision, but where do these capabilities fit in that we're talking about today? Of course, that's the green box here. We call these modules. So CICS and Db2 is really two separate modules that are grouped together here. They can be licensed individually if desired. So at this point, I'm going to switch it over to Gilbert to start talking about the CICS operations analytics area.
Okay, thank you, Brent, for the introduction. I'll cover the CICS product in like 5 minutes, and then Todd will do a demo. So for CICS, I think the most important thing is keeping your CICS environment healthy. That's what you're all working on. And for CICS, that means making sure that it does have sufficient access to the processors running the CICS workload, meaning you have to worry about the utilization of the CPs, but also about capping and about the way WLM is set up to manage the different regions. The rich history of CICS also means that it's still important to know about all the memory it's using below the line, below the bar. Memory leaks are relevant and should be monitored. But that in itself is not enough. I mean, CICS is part of the mainframe ecosystem. And not only does it require a good CP, but it also requires a healthy Db2 or whatever database you're using, IMS, good performance from MQ, good network connectivity. So it's just a piece in a big, complicated environment. And even when everything's right, I think you all have experience in your systems being running perfectly fine, but the transactions themselves being inefficient in terms of either the logging structure they're employing, the SQL they're using, or the way they set up their MQ queues. So keeping a CICS environment healthy is not an easy thing to do. It's not sufficient to look at CICS by itself. So where does IntelliMagic Vision help? Well, first of all, we have what we call availability intelligence dashboards that look at the ZOS system, look at workload manager, look at MQ, look at Db2, and indicate whether those subsystems are overall healthy. I mean, if your CP is severely constrained and LPAR is severely capped, you wouldn't expect CICS to perform well, I mean, however you may have configured it. Of course, CICS data is also available from regular records on the mainframe. We'll talk about that later in the Db2 context, but also applies to CICS, that you can see a lot about how CICS performs from job records or dataset records or coupling authority records without even looking at the specific CICS data. And then, of course, the thing that this webinar is about is our support for the CICS transaction data, which will give you all the details that CICS has about the response time profile and in general the breakdown of the performance for CICS. So just one example of comparing the CICS data with the mainframe data. So this is an example of a rated chart. So this is a chart where we look at the result and say, well, this doesn't look good. This looks at how much CP time, what percentage of the time the CP resource is actually available to CICS when I would like to use it, which is for this particular system, it's typically around 40%, but it drops significantly in the evening hours. Well, your reflex might be to go look for what's causing this within CICS, but the more appropriate solution is to switch over to the ZOS portion of the product and say, gee, really, this LBAR is kept, and so what else would you expect? So by correlating the COS and the mainframe perspective, you can see a lot more than just by looking at KICS itself. So that's why it's important to have this overall picture. Of course, if you want to go a bit deeper into the KICS transactions, not the regions, there's two different ways to do it. One is to use the RMF support, which has been recently significantly improved in report classes, which allows you to keep track of group of transactions defined in a report class. And for those transactions, you can find the most important metrics, which is the response time, the CPU use per transaction, and also the WLM context. That's a very powerful capability that will likely meet most of the needs for capacity planning folks. Of course, the real deep KICS experts will still want to look at the KICS monitor records, where the report classes provide one metric, the response time. The KICS monitor records have about 100 metrics about timing aspects of the KICS transaction. Timing in the sense of the particular CPU category is classified in for CPU use, and also timers for all the various delay reasons. And in addition to those 100 metrics, there's about 275 different metrics about KICS transactions. So while the RMF data is powerful and good for capacity planning, the 110s do still provide way more data. So our support that Todd will be demoing is mostly, Todd's demo is mostly about the 110, so the 110 subtype 1, which is the transaction reporting. Clearly, it would not be a viable approach to categorize and keep every transaction. So what we do is we summarize the data based on a 15-minute interval aligning with what people typically do for RMF. And if you're at 5 or 10 minutes, you can use that as an aggregation interval too, so it's up to you. The shorter the interval, the more data, but that's your call. And every individual field is available. To do the summarization, we had some interaction with customers as to what they felt were the most important criteria to categorize by. Obviously, the top two are the region and the transactions. I mean, those are the most important things to classify transactions by. But also the original transaction ID and region are important, so you can see the flow of transactions through the system. The ABN codes, which are useful to see the overhead. I think Todd will demo that too. And then for more modern transactions, the actual transaction code may be more like a placeholder or skeleton, with the actual transactions or work being more specifically defined in web resources and web operations. And we track those too, so you can see the KICS performance and KICS transactions at that detail level. And then there's many filtering approaches that I think the demo is well equipped to show in terms of finding the busiest transactions, finding the most transactions, and all kind of filtering. You'll see in the demo that really the most powerful capability of our product is to slice and dice the data any way you like, inspired by what you're seeing on the screen. So with this quick intro as to what we're doing on the transaction KICS transaction side, I'd like to pass it over to Todd, and Todd will do the demo for the first KICS piece of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Gilbert. So I'm now going to demonstrate the visibility and context-sensitive drill downs that IntelliMagic Vision provides into that rich set of metrics from the SMF 110 records that Gilbert just described. So if we want to choose to begin our analysis with a focus on transactions, we can view the top transactions by CPU consumed or by transaction volume. Gilbert talked about the filtering capability that's available really throughout the product. Here we can see there are dozens of criteria that we can use, and we can create a complex expression if we want with ands or ors. If we want to look at by tran codes or region, CICS regions or ZOS systems or service class or whatever. So let's say in this scenario that we are investigating a impact of an application program change, and we want to limit our reporting to programs that begin with a certain string. So setting that filter now changes the scope of this and all subsequent reporting to executions of programs with that begin with that character string, and that's until we delete the filter. All right, so drill downs are available to analyze. For example, let's look at this transaction and let's drill down into the response time. So we see response time across the selected time interval broken out by the standard CICS response time components, total I/O wait time, dispatch but not using CPU, and CPU time. And then from here we can drill down into the subcomponents, for example, of the I/O wait time, and see that in this case it's almost entirely wait for control at the end of MRO. Now another powerful capability that's available throughout the IntelliMagic Vision product is the ability to customize a report and compare, bring different variables together and to evaluate whether there's a correlation between them. So this is a response time chart, but now let's also add to this chart the transaction rate so we can see if there's any correlation between those two metrics. And so of course we'll add that on a separate axis because it's got a different unit of measure. So we see in this scenario there appears to be a mild inverse relationship. When there's more transactions, the response time is a little bit lower. So in many sites today that rely on a catalog of static reports, ad hoc analysis of this type would require the coding effort for a new report. So again, returning to the top transactions by volume, they can also be analyzed by the perspective of those primary response time components. So here's the CPU per tran for these transactions, again by subcomponent. We talked about I/O wait times earlier. If we want to look at the other wait time and all the subcomponents there for those top transactions, and then we can look at it also by resource manager interface time, and again by component there. Now if I'm investigating a response time issue, I may want to start from a response time view. Here we have, again, the top 30 transactions in the response time. So let's say I'm going to investigate this particular transaction, and I want to see if the response time across the various CICS regions where it's running was similar or differed. And so in this scenario, it looks like it's a pretty similar response time no matter what CICS region it was running in. And maybe I want to investigate that too by ZOS system and see if there's any difference there. And also in that scenario here, we have a pretty consistent response time no matter what system that transaction is executing on. Or instead of taking a transaction perspective, perhaps we want to view the workload by CICS region. And so see which regions used the most CPU or which regions executed the highest transaction volumes. And there again, now we have the drill down capabilities, but now it's at a region level. We can drill down and see, for example, what the response time was over time in this particular CICS region. And again, we have the drill downs into the subcomponents of these response times. Telemetric Vision also enables analysis at the level of web services. So here we see the volume of transactions that are using web services. And we can drill in and see, look at this by a web service operation name, or we can look at it by resource definition name. Or we can start from a perspective of looking at those resource definition names and then, for example, see, well, which transactions are executing that particular web service. And then finally, the extensive raw data in those CICS CMF 110 records is also available for detailed analysis, as you can see in this list of data categories here on the left-hand side of the screen. So, for example, if we want to look at the number of program load requests by transaction, and then again drill into that by CICS region or another drill down. Or we may say, for example, look at the number of CICS log stream writes that are coming from each particular transaction. And again, we drill down capabilities from there. So as Gilbert talked about, the 275 metrics, so those are grouped into these categories, and they're available for your analysis as well. So that's been a brief introduction to the visibility and drill down capabilities provided by IntelliMagic Vision into the SMF 110 CMF transaction data. Gilbert, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Great. Thanks for the demo, Todd. So after the CICS demo, we're going to talk about Db2, our support for Db2 in terms of looking at the RMF data, the SMF data, and looking at the Db2 specific records. So when we've had support for Db2 for quite a while in the IntelliMagic Vision product, with dashboards and reports specifically for Db2 based on things like naming conventions. We'll show it in a minute. From the regular RMF and SMF data, so reports about logs and group effort pools, dataset hit miss, the log files and the hyperride use, all stuff that you can do for Db2 analysis based on records that are not created by Db2 but are kept by the regular standard US operating system. What's new for our products and the newly licensed component is the analysis of the Db2 statistics and the Db2 accounting data. So the statistics talk about the overall health of the Db2 members, and the accounting data talks about the individual Db2 transactions. Of course, all of you will have probably multiple Db2 monitors. So why would you look at IntelliMagic Vision for yet another monitor for Db2? Well, hopefully the demo that Todd just did for CICS will give you a bit of an idea as to what to look for. The biggest feedback we got so far is that the macro view, the fact that you can use the product to quickly assess the health of an environment or to quickly assess the activity in an environment, is something that's very hard to do with any other product. Typically, if you're looking like a real-time monitor, you're using a microscope, and microscopes are extremely powerful once you know what you're looking for. But as long as you're still in exploration mode, as you're still trying to understand what's going on, a microscope is not a very good solution. So we have the micro view, the way to start at the data sharing group, and then go to subsequently go into more detail. Also for Db2, like for the other parts of the mainframe, we do have our ratings. So I'll get back to that. The GUI, which will allow you to navigate the data. For Db2, we support about 1,000 different fields. So there's about 1,000 new fields in the product that are taken from the Db2 statistics in the accounting records, and the GUI makes those available for you. Just like for CICS, also for Db2, of course, it's very important to have the ZUS context. Just like CICS, Db2 likes maybe more than CICS. Db2 likes lots of resources, and having those available is key for the Db2 performance. So what will IntelliMagic Vision give you immediately right away? I think the dashboards will immediately highlight for you any violation, essentially, of best practices rules as they have been defined by the Db2 and IBM teams over the years. So lots of the rules and recommendations on how to tune the system, how the buffer should be set up, are all incorporated in the product. We found out when demoing the product to the customers, the first thing they will say, well, I see this spike, but what happened? Is this a new one, or was the same thing happening yesterday? And it's really easy with IntelliMagic Vision product to just compare today with yesterday or last week or last month, so you can see whether today was an exceptional thing or whether this is really a recurring issue. Also, from a slicing and dicing data perspective, just like for CICS, with the filtering, you can view at any level you like. So even though we start that level of the data sharing group, if you already know what member you're interested in, you can filter for that member right away and only look at that particular member. So it's quite powerful from a GUI and a data analysis perspective. So now a few words about the use of IntelliMagic Vision for existing mainframe records, which is not something we'll talk much about in the demo, so that's why we have a few slides. So what we do in Telemetric Vision is we use all the IBM naming conventions for structures and data sets and service classes to find out which portion of the workloads are actually executed by Db2, which belong to CICS or which belong to IMS or which belong to MQ. And this is coded in a set of rules, and mainframe-like rules with a JCL type command language or some kind of command language, such that you can customize it to your conventions, because for most customers we find that they use IBM conventions but also have their own. So you can customize this, and once you do that, the benefit you get is you're going to get your mainframe data, for example, about coupling facility, like in this example, now grouped by the different Db2 use categories. So this is coupling facility data, and it separately shows the overall Db2, the Db2 buffers, the group buffer pools, and the Db2 log structures. And those different structures tend to have different uses at the coupling facility and therefore also different potential issues. So by grouping them this way, you can very quickly see what kind of things are going wrong or are not entirely healthy in the environment. So this requires you to set up, or at least it helps to set up the application groups. We also have reports that talk about the dataset or database activity from the storage perspective. So if you define the Db2 databases in the Db2 management environment, you'll define the database name and you find the table spaces and the like. And they are one-on-one included in the dataset names. So what IntelliMagic Vision will do is it will parse the dataset names into the Db2 terminology and then summarize it by, in this case, by high-level qualifier, which tends to be the VCAT, so the catalog name. Of course, different customers use different conventions for the VCAT. For some customers, we found the VCAT name is actually the data sharing group. For other customers, it's the application, but it's always a useful categorization of the data. And then you can see what percentage of the I/O to disk is actually read hit or read miss, which will give you an indication as to how effective buffering is. I mean, the more effective buffering on the mainframe, the higher the miss on the disk. The more disk cache on the controller, the lower the hit, the miss probability will be. So it gives you some management angle on the data. You can also, from the VCAT, you can drill down to the databases and even to the table spaces. So you can go pretty deep in terms of what you can see from the SMF data, from the SMF42 data, in terms of the dataset activity, which will then help you to tune the buffer pools and to tune the Db2 in general. Of course, for Db2 specifically, there's lots of data written by Db2 itself, and again, that's the new capability we're talking about today. So for the statistics data, we support most of the statistics fields from the 100, statistics sections from the 100 records, SMF 100. We work with the Db2 experts, and we identified 65 metrics that we felt would be the most beneficial to look for in terms of health indicators. So those metrics would find any potential tuning issue or configuration issue in your Db2 environment. So those we summarize in dashboards in the GUI. Again, initially by data sharing group, because most likely your production LPARs will be hopefully mostly green in terms of they will behave well. But you also have development data sharing groups where you didn't really tune for performance. You're trying to achieve maybe more cost or efficiency objectives. So by summarizing them by data sharing group, you can get the results in a consumable way. And you'll see in a minute, also in this case, you can do the drill downs from a data sharing group to the members, or like when it's about buffer pools, even down to the individual buffer pools. So we support, like I said, we support most of the sections from the statistics records, the most important ones, I guess the buffer pools for most people. But also important, it's also important to know about your operational health. I mean, how many of the transactions do abend? What kind of issues are there? Or do operators cancel jobs or transactions often? And then if so, you can find out why this is happening. Logging, obviously important for many of you. Although I would point out that for logging, the statistics from DB2 are useful because they give you the DB2 perspective. But we also have logging reporting at the dataset level, just along the lines of what I've shown before on the DB2 databases. So you can see the performance from the DB2 logs in terms of I/O straight away from the I/O records, which you could use, for example, to see, well, we've just been able to see hyperwrite. Does it actually make things faster for us? And you'll find it will, and then you can see by how much. So lots of health checks in the DB2 product as well as we have for the overall CUS system product. We'll now let Todd do the demo for DB2, and then I'll talk a little bit about the accounting records at the end of his demo.
All right, thank you, Gilbert. Okay, so I'm now going to look at the visibility IntelliMagic Vision gives to the SMF Type 100 DB2 statistics records, which provide metrics at the DB2 member or subsystem level. So as Gilbert described, this set of dashboards across the top of the screen here represent one of the strategic capabilities of IntelliMagic Vision, that it's automatically checking the thousands of elements of your ZOS infrastructure to identify potential risks to availability. Here, leveraging data from the DB2 statistics records, evaluating 65 metrics against each data sharing group and member to identify areas that might warrant additional investigation on your part, in areas such as buffer pools and locks and latches and logging. So looking at this buffer pool dashboard, we note this exception for sequential prefetch disabled, no buffers. It's occurring for this particular data sharing group. Represents the number of times the sequential prefetch threshold is reached. So let's drill down to see which size of buffer pools this is occurring in. And we see it's happening in the 4K buffers. So now we can drill in further here and see a set of mini charts for all the metrics on this dashboard. And their borders are highlighted with red or yellow if there are exceptions or warnings, and we can compare various metrics at a glance. So selecting this first time chart, we see the frequency that this is occurring, we're reaching this sequential prefetch threshold over this interval. So let's drill down and see which members of the data sharing group are experiencing this. So DB2H8 is one of the members. It's occurring. So let's drill down and see in which particular buffer pool is this occurring. And we see that it's in buffer pool 1. So again, as Gilbert mentioned, is this typical? Is this an anomaly? So throughout IntelliMagic Vision, we can quickly compare to any other time interval in the database. So in this case, let's just look earlier in this week and see whether this activity was occurring then as well, or whether this was just an anomaly. And we see here that yes, this activity tends to commonly occur. All right, so now looking at the lock and latch dashboard, we see some exceptions here for lock conflicts and for latch conflicts. So again, let's look into those mini charts that show all those metrics at a glance. So we see right off that the time of day profile for the lock conflicts and the latch conflicts are definitely different from one another. So let's explore the latch conflicts further, again, see if they are distributed across the members of the data sharing group or more predominant in a few. So in the legend over here, the members that have the more exceptions in more intervals are bolded, and so we can see that's H4 and HB. So let's go ahead and customize this report and just look at those two members and eliminate the rest, kind of eliminate the noise, so to speak. So here we can see now that during the prime shift, the profile is pretty similar, although DBHB had quite a few more of the latch conflicts at night here. So again, another way to talk about whether this is common or an anomaly is we can leverage the trending capabilities, again, that are built in throughout the entire product and look at this data over the last month by time of day. So this green line represents the average for each day. The green bar represents the 10th and 90th percentile of the days, and the yellow bars represent the min and max values. And so we can see there's a similar profile, and yes, this activity tends to occur throughout the period of the last month. We can also drill into this further by day a week and see if there's a unique profile, the weekends are a little lower, and then the weekdays look like they have typically a pretty similar profile. There's these report sets on the left of the screen capture those many areas of the Db2 statistics records, you know, that can be evaluated then for further analysis. For example, here we see the number of commits by data sharing group, and we can drill into that and see the commits by type over the time interval. Another key aspect of the infrastructure for Db2 performance is logging. So here we're looking at log throughput by data sharing group, and again we can compare this with other intervals if we think there's an anomaly. We may also be interested in looking at the number of occurrences when a request to write to a log buffer was suspended, as we see here. And then again we can drill down and see if this is unique to one or two members or pretty common across the entire data sharing group, which is the latter is the case here. Now, since one key aspect of Db2 performance tuning is effective buffer pool management, the visibility provided through this buffer pool focal point can be very helpful for performance analysis. So in terms of prefetch, we've got a number of prefetch related metrics here, and so we can drill into this and see some underlying metrics. You know, for example, here we see the number of prefetch requests and IOs for the various types of prefetch: dynamic, sequential, and list. And here are the number of pages per IO for each of those types of prefetches. Now looking at the get page activity, again, we can see several metrics relating to get pages, including a random get page and sequential get page activity. So again, if we select the random get page activity chart, we see the random sync read IOs in the blue and the get pages in red. So we want the sync IOs to be a very small amount of that. So that says we would want it. And then here's the buffer pool hit percentage for random get pages. Now, since an important objective of buffer pool tuning is seeking to reduce sync read IOs, let's look at that metric in a little more detail. So here are the sync read IOs again by data sharing group, and again we can look at that by member and see if the profile is pretty similar across the members or differs significantly. Again, pretty similar, looks like, for around most of the members. So now let's drill into this by buffer pool and see which buffer pools are generating the most sync read IOs. And so in this environment, you can see it's buffer pool 5, buffer pool 21, buffer pool 20, and buffer pool 15. So those pools could be the initial focus of tuning efforts to try to reduce the number of sync read IOs. All right, now we'll take a very brief look at the SMF Type 100 Db2 accounting records. They provide detailed metrics at the plan and package level, so I'll just briefly demonstrate those, and then Gilbert will say a little bit more about them. So on the left of the screen here, we see again the report sets for various metrics that are contained in those Db2 accounting records. So starting here from this list of commits by data sharing group, and then from here we can drill down, and again now we said this data is at the plan level, so we could drill in to that by plan and see how many commits are being done by plan. We could also drill into that by connection type and see where the different Db2 commits are coming from. Now, if we want to look at things from a response time perspective, here we see the components, again, in the DB2 accounting records now, the various components that it tracks for response time for each data sharing group. And then, again, we can look at this by plan. And then if we want to say pick a particular plan and then view the components of response time over time, here we see how they're distributed across this interval. We may also want to look at it from the perspective of just the different connection types that are interfacing with DB2. So, for example, if it's a CICS attach connection, maybe we want to look at that data by package and look at the response time components by the various packages using the CICS attach. Or, again, we can look at the elapsed time across the interval, again, by the components that are tracked in the 101 accounting records. So that's a brief introduction into the visibility and drill down capabilities that IntelliMagic Vision provides into the SMF 100 DB2 statistics and the 101 accounting records. Gilbert, I'll now turn it back over to you.
Well, thanks, Todd, for the demo. So the 101 records are different from the 100 records in the sense that they're much more voluminous. They also have much more detail. So what Todd did demo was the response time breakdown in terms of the class 1, class 2, class 3 components. Mostly the demo did show the wait time, so that's the class 3 components. So we support those for the all those counters for the plan and the package data. Of course, not every customer would like to collect the data because it's extremely voluminous. So you may want to do this just maybe for a couple of hours a week or continuously or a mix of plan and package data. From our perspective, it's fine either way. We'll keep the data at the same level of detail that you collect it. So we basically, whatever is available to IntelliMagic Vision will be used for a product. So when we were working with the different early customers to define the requirements for the 101 data, we were actually getting two different readings. One is plan is sufficiently detailed, and that gives us everything we need. So that's the one view which would allow you to look by plan, by correlation name, by connection type. But then other customers say, well, no, we really would like to see which packages are behaving the way they are behaving, because being able to see which packages are doing inefficient stuff, we can go back to the developers and tell them this particular package, this program, this version is giving this behavior. Please have a look. So that's what the package view provides. So from the charts that Todd demoed, if you click a sufficient number of times, in the end you'll get down to a view that will tell you which packages and which versions of the packages we're actually using the product. So we spent about 50 minutes about CICS and Db2 in our product, which has been a pretty aggressive timescale. So now I'd like to hand over to Brent again for a poll question and for our Q&A session.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gilbert and Todd. Obviously, our intent was to give you just a taste of that. If you want to see more, we'll be happy to set that up. Janine, if you would load the poll for us, we'll give everybody an opportunity to kind of tell us how they would describe the current level of visibility into CICS and Db2 data for performance analysis. So there's multiple choice question here. You'll see it on your screen, either very little visibility, so you rarely look at it, or limited, static reports you run periodically, moderate, meaning you have some tooling in place that supports most of the typical analysis you need to do, or you feel that you have extensive, that you really have what you need to quickly drill down and get great value out of that data. So once we get a sufficient number of responses in here, we will share these poll results. So thank you for answering. Give you just a few more seconds to select one of those answers. Okay, Janine, why don't we go ahead and close this out, and so we can move on to wrap up the webinar and get to some questions. But let's share these results.
Okay, Brent, I've sent the results to the audience.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you can review those. Let me just kind of wrap up with a couple of conclusions and then some questions time here. One of the things people often ask is, how is this delivered? We do have the option to deliver this via what we call our private cloud. So it's software as a service in a near real-time mode in terms of how the data is loaded. We provide the infrastructure and the services to manage that so you can focus on analysis. And it makes it easy also for some of our experts to jump on and provide some advice and some professional services as well. We do support on-premise as well, so you can transition between those two platforms at any time. I talked at the beginning about an offer to see this process for your own data. So we can receive data from you. You just FTP some of the historical CICS and Db2 data and some of the other SMF records that we need to be able to navigate through it and kind of see the new capabilities to compare with what you're currently using today. So it's a pretty simple process. It'll take somebody maybe half a day, and then we'll generally set up a session to present the results to you as well, and even give you log-ons so you can explore the new analytics for your environment. I'll also there's a link in the PDF that you'll get afterwards to be able to request that if you're interested. There's also a slide here with some additional recorded demonstrations on it. So at this point, let's jump over to some questions, and we won't have enough time to answer everybody's questions, but there's I see some logical grouping between some of them. Let's start with one about the historical data. How much historical data do we keep for trending and comparison purposes? Gilbert, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So basically it's up to you. So the way the product works is there's two levels of data. There's the detailed data, which is what we base the demo for. Detail, we mean the 15-minute averages of the data. Typically, that's set up to keep for anywhere between 30 days and half a year, depending on the level of interest in the data, or even longer if it's about more high-level statistics. I would expect for, say, Db2 statistics, you would typically keep a couple of months. And for transaction data, maybe 30 days or 60 days. In addition to that, we also always keep what's called a trending database or a yearly database, which has key metrics by shift, by day. And that you can keep as long as you like. You can keep for years. So you can see what the average is over a particular shift. And the definition of a shift is up to you. So it could be weekend or night or peak or day, things like that. So it's up to you, but the detail level, typically at least 30 days, and the trending data forever, essentially, years.
Okay. Thank you. Todd, how about this one for you? There's several questions about the compare functionality that you showed. Is it available for all of the reports or just some of the reports?
Yes, it's available throughout the product for all the reports. You can compare any intervals that are in the database. And as Gilbert just talked about, you know, that the size of the retention period is negotiable. But yes, that interface is available for every single report throughout the product.
Okay, great. Maybe another one on the user interface here. Can you sort the CICS transactions, for example, by other characteristics such as response time, memory used, et cetera?
Well, yes, you can. So the reports that you have, that we are showing, is just the way the product is delivered out of the box. In any report, you can customize it to your liking. So you can change the sort order, you can change the metrics. So you could start off with a chart that shows the transactions based on activity rate, and then you change the metric activity rate into memory usage, and then you get the transactions based on maximum memory usage. So you can, any chart that, even charts that are not predefined, you can just make them up by customizing the report that you see to your liking. So it's pretty flexible to do whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, so maybe this one is similar to that, but maybe a little different nuance. Are you able to break down the CICS and Db2 transactions by transaction response time? Any additional comments to that, Joubert?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. So for both the CICS transactions and the Db2 transactions, we do have reports that show you the total response time broken down by the components. And of course, for CICS and for Db2, there really are way more components than you typically want to be aware of, because it's like for CICS it's about 100 different counters. For Db2, I think like 60. So there's kind of industry standard groupings on how to put these together, like these are I/O, or these are latches, or these are network delays. We mostly follow those conventions, do a bit more detail. So at the first level, you'll see a response time broken down in between 6 and 8 categories. And then if you feel like, gee, for this one, the I/O seems to be a big portion, then you can get a drill down to see which portion or which types of I/O are actually causing the delay. So in CICS cases, whether it's network delay or storage delay, or for Db2 transactions, whether it's for logging or sync reads or other I/O aspects. So there's a lot of detail about the transaction profile. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can it notify me when one of the Db2 dashboards finds a problem, or do I need to look at them every day?
Well, of course you should look at them every day. It's such a great product. You shouldn't miss that opportunity. Yes. So the way it works, the dashboards are designed to color code essentially the findings. So when everything is green, all is good. When we show yellow or orange and red, then there are certain metrics that are not meeting the best practices that we feel are reasonable. So the approach we recommend is that you, as a user, will go through these dashboards and see, well, I agree with this red one, I'm going to fix this and make sure it's not red anymore. Or you might say, well, this one is red, but this really is because of my night shift, and I don't care about my night shift because I'll have plenty of time anyways. I'll tell the product not to complain about the night shift. So then you would customize the dashboard rules. You would customize the system to learn about your environment. So then once you've done that, likely it's mostly going to be green. And we have the ability to set up email alerts that will send you the dashboards whenever they're not green. So you will not get anything if everything's green, but you will get an email if a dashboard or a different report for that matter is showing some kind of an exception. So there's email alerting based on well, you can also specify to get the email anyways, but you can also define emails based on the exception levels or the findings that were identified during the analysis of the data.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So, Janine, do you have any final comments?
Thanks, Brent. Well, I just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar and making it the most popular ever. I also want to thank you, Brent, Joubert, and Todd for sharing your expertise with us today, and remind everyone on the call that later this week you should watch for a follow-up email. It will contain a link to the recording of today's webinar, and that concludes our webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.